Welcome back, belterlowda, inyalowda, to my Expanse Books Ranked series. Yay! Thank you very much. Now, not much of an introduction for this video, just that A, I'd appreciate feedback for anything I can do better, within reason, alright? Don't expect anything more than pictures and words, at least for now. And B, I would like to give a shout out to Reddit user Mingle1 for posting part 1 of my videos on Reddit. Much appreciated, mate. Feel free to do it again. Wink, wink. And also, I apologise for taking so long with this follow-up video, but this video has just kicked my ass quite a bit, coming in at 4 times as many words as the first video. So, yeah, greetings everyone. It is time to gush. Right, so coming in at number 7 is Babylon's Ashes. That's right, shocker, I know. Alright, as I mentioned in my first video, it was a real toss-up between Cibola Burn and Babylon's Ashes for 8th and 7th place. But when writing this video and going back through the book, I was like, yeah, okay, this is definitely better than book 4, but it's still one of my least favourites. Now, the title is of course a reference to the events of the previous book in which Earth was crippled. Babylon was a city in ancient Mesopotamia? Mesopotamia, yeah, I think I got that right. That was the seat of power for one of the first empires in history and was a very important city in the area for hundreds of years. Now, as I said before, I will be referring to other sources when needed, but I do actually have this book with me. I have books 6, 7 and 8 with me, but the rest are back in the UK, unfortunately. So, for those 3, I can actually physically flick through them myself, you know, which is very helpful. So, Babylon's Ashes picks up right after Nemesis games and finds the system in an uproar as Earth, Mars and even a slice of the belt are fighting for their lives against the tyranny of Marco Inorus and his Free Navy bastards. Now that Earth has been crippled, half of Mars' fleet has taken off and the OPA are scattered, Inorus begins to exact his... Is that the word you use? Exact his grand plan, yeah. It sounds funny. It sounds funny when I see it on paper. Inorus begins to exact his grand plan of a system-wide belter civilization. Now, I've got like a good 25 highlights, and considering my first video took me damn near fucking 40 minutes just for 6, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go into detail for the main highlights that I've chosen as my personal favourites, and then just kind of, list off the minor highlights as quickly as possible. Not too quick, lad. Now, another reason for the lengthy fucking undertaking this was I got neighbours and they're drilling like all fucking day. The neighbours right next to me on the roof. Ugh, so annoying. You know, can't be helped, but so I apologise if you hear any in the background. I'll check my sound just to make sure it's not completely fucking terrible. Now, I'm going to start with the cons this time, as Cibola Burn and Babylon's Ashes are probably going to be the only 2 videos in which I'll actually discuss them in detail. Because right now they're the only two books in the series that I have a problem with, and, well, honestly, I just thought the rest were basically perfect. Perfect being that I loved them start to finish, and I only appreciate them more in retrospect. Whereas with these 2, I look back and I'm like, yeah, okay, they could have been a little bit better. I mean, I could be wrong when I go through the others again. Maybe I'll see some things that I don't rate quite as high as I thought. Who knows? Not me, not yet. Right, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my experience with this book, right? Because Babylon's Ashes, I'm sure, was the newest release when I started reading this series, and I had been pumped for it since the end of book 1, when I read that there was going to be almost 20 POV characters, and then after finishing Nemesis games, I was even more pumped for it. You know, I was like, fucking yes, this is going to be the one, man. This is going to be the most awesome book in the series. And then, well, I started reading it, and then I stopped reading it. And it's the only Expanse book I'd put down before finishing. Stopped about a third of the way through, and I didn't go back to it for like at least a year. Persepolis Rising was already out, and I couldn't bring myself to start reading Babylon's Ashes again. You know, I'd crossed that line. Cross the threshold of too late to continue from where I left off, too early to read it again from the beginning, you know. I think some people hopefully relate to that. But last Christmas I read it while I was in holiday in Thailand. and I was like, man, why the fuck did I stop reading this series? It's so goddamn good. My shaken faith had stabilized, and then I banged out Persepolis just in time for Tiamat's release, so I'm all up to date. So my main problem with book 6, right, is it's something I can't quite put my finger on exactly. It's just a bit too much. Like it's so ambitious, and at times it feels like there's too many characters. Not all the time, as you'll see when I get to my highlights, but and the majority of it does pay off. Like a good 98% of the book pays off. It's just hard for me to not think a couple of the chapters or felt a little pointless and boring and kind of slow down the pace. At least when I first read it. Now reading back through certain chapters now, it doesn't really seem that way, but I'm not reading through it properly, so I can't really count it. They're all well written and in character, but like, okay, let me just give an example. Okay, Prax, right? I felt he had a chapter too many. Now it sounds stupid because he only has 3 chapters, but I think he should have had 2. Like, I like Prax a lot, and I was really grateful to catch up with him to see what his life was like now and how Ganymede was after the Free Navy took over. And it was super fucking great that he risked his own life and his family's to help Earth provide food for his people by leaking his research for a modified yeast reverse engineered from the proto-molecule, despite being a belter himself. That was absolutely swell. It was very swell. But I did really feel that they slowed down the pace of the book a little bit. And then in the end, the Free Navy just kind of released him with a slap on the wrist. And it's not terrible or anything, but like, imagine if they fucking killed him, dude. It would have been harsh. It would have been harsh. But yeah, I just felt like it could have been done in 2 chapters, you know, set up and pay off. I'd rather have given another chapter to someone else instead. Like Amos, you know, because he only had 1 chapter in this, and it was a kind of a weird chapter. It was essentially him trying to figure out why Holden didn't destroy the Pella, or why the torpedoes were disarmed. And I remember thinking, I read it like this could have happened off book, right? Like in between chapters, like it just kind of felt like a weird forced way to get Holden to explain why he disarmed the torpedoes, especially when the reader already knows why he did it. Like, it's not hard to figure out. And I understand that it was because Amos wouldn't allow it to happen again, and needs to know Holden would pull the trigger next time, and that Holden hasn't told Naomi because he doesn't want her to feel bad, which is a great moment. But yeah, I don't know, it just felt like again, similar with the Prax extra chapter, it just felt a little bit too fatty. Now, the 3 main POV characters are James Holden, Michio Parr, and Philip Inaros / Nagata. Then there's another 16 POVs, including the prologue and epilogue, sprinkled in with about 1 to 4 chapters each. So yeah, there's just this feeling I had when I was reading it, that we were sometimes just kind of hot swapping for the sake of it. Like, it reminded me of pressing the square button on Battlefield 2 Modern Combat. I don't know if any of you ever played that, but you'd press square and it'd be like, say there'd be like 50 soldiers on your team, and you'd press square and you'd just go and swap to another one, and that way you could control the battlefield by yourself. Yeah, so I just got like that kind of feeling, like fucking hell. I've just looked it up. That game is going to be 14 years old next month. That is just, oh my god, I'm so fucking old. Oh my god, I'm old. Anyway, anyway, I also wasn't the biggest fan of Michio Parr, right? I just didn't find some of her chapters that interesting, at least not consistently. Now, don't get me wrong, she's a damn good character, strong, well written, with a logical and organic arc, who is absolutely vital to the 3rd act of the whole series, and she has some great moments in this book. But I can't really help that I found her a bit boring sometimes, you know. I mean, the show has cut her out completely, it seems, and I'm not saying that it confirms my opinion, but I will say that I agree with the choice to combine her and Samara Rosenberg's character with Drummer, because now Drummer is an amazing character by the end of season 3 already, whereas she's not really in it that much until book 7. Anyway, I'm hoping when I reread the entire series that I do appreciate Michio Parr a lot more. It could just be me, but for now, that's what I'm saying. Now, the next thing I'm going to mention isn't a con per se, so much as it's a complaint that some people seem to have, and I can understand and see both perspectives regarding whether it's valid or not. And maybe I just feel guilty for liking it regardless if it's possibly objective wasted opportunity or bad writing or whatever, but hopefully you'll understand what I mean and don't just think I'm an indecisive little bitch. Right, so Marco Inaros was an awesome villain in book 5, fucking awesome villain. But then in this one, there's people who thought he was flat and overplayed as the big bad and didn't really account for nothing, and at first At first I did think that a little bit too. I mean, I wouldn't say he didn't account for nothing. He fucking crippled her, for fuck's sake. But I did expect a lot more from him after book 5. But also that's the whole point, right? He was just a pawn in Duarte's game, and a damn good one. And the thing about Marco is that, like, his heart is in the right place at the end of the day. Like, the belt does deserve better and is in need of a real leader. But his head is in the fucking clouds, man. He's got a timeshare in Bespin, you know what I mean? Like, we knew he was an arsehole the whole time. A loudmouth, fucking blowhard, arrogant, spiteful twat. But in book 6, we see him in a more pathetic light, like, from Philip's point of view, I think. Like, he's the kind of guy who would accept credit that isn't his, and would never admit he's wrong, and thinks he's well read and understands history and society, and that everything is falling into place for him. But in reality, he's just deluding himself, which is excellently depicted when he tries to compare himself to Captain Ahab when talking to Rosenfeld, who, by the way, would be a much better leader than Marco. And Rosenfeld is just like, you didn't finish reading that book, did you, Koya? Marco is basically Dennis Reynolds from Sunny. No, actually no. He's a better comparison would be Kai Anderson from American Horror Story Cult. I don't know if you've watched that, but that's definitely a better comparison. Marco is essentially a cult leader. But, you know, we were warned of this by Naomi in the previous book, and as I said, that's the point. He's not the real villain, but he's not quite a red herring either. He's just a charismatic psychopath given way too much power to distract humanity, while Laconia prepares its own takeover. And he almost ended up killing everyone instead of saving them anyway. Pretty much all of his captains realise what a nasty, spiteful flop he really is, and end up betraying him anyway. By the way, maybe this was addressed in the book, but I can't remember. What if the Free Navy was still up and running things when Laconia showed up? Like, was Marco going to bow down willingly to Duarte and give him control? Did Marco know Duarte was going to come back for everyone? Please discuss below in the comments, because I'm interested to hear what people's thoughts are on that. It does seem that Marco was simply under the impression that he and his rule... sorry, let me say that again. It does seem that Marco was simply under the impression that he and his... Why did I write it like that? Just fucking making it harder for myself. That he and his would rule, and Duarte would be left to his own devices, undisturbed. Also, while on the subject of Marco, who do you think would be a good cast for him for the show? Like, I've seen a picture, or I've seen some kind of post or whatever, saying Michael Mando from Better Call Saul in Far Cry 3. I think that's a pretty damn good cast. I'd have to give him some long belter locks, and I think he's definitely got the charm and the fucking, you know, kind of hidden psychopathy about him. So I think that would be a really good cast, or maybe it's too much. Anywho, now I've gotten that negativity off my chest, let's go through some of the highlights, shall we? Because there is some fucking awesome stuff in this book, and lots of it. So I'm just going to try and do more of a quick fire list right now of some moments that don't really need too much explaining. If you've read the books, which you should have if you're here, hopefully you'll know exactly what I'm talking about and give each one the old Belter fist lift. Okay, so number 1. The prologue. The opening chapter is from the perspective of Anushka's wife, Namono. Dun, 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 Namono. Da, 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 da. Sorry, I couldn't resist. And we get to see the current state of Earth from the perspective of someone who was there during the attack and is still living there afterward. And it is fucked. Like everyone on Earth, her community and home is devastated, and once she was a middle-class citizen, is now reduced to living off basic, and relying on the government's aid, government, which is stretched out thin enough as it is. Now, Anna's leg was badly injured, and yet despite that, her faith and will remain strong, and she still wants to host congregations at her house. We also learn that... So can you hear that? Can you hear that drilling? I'm going to have to check this. We also learn that rocks are still being dropped from the sky, and the fear coming from knowing that any time the UN might fail to catch them and that Earth probably won't survive another hit would keep anyone awake. But despite all despair, they stay strong for their family and for their people and for the rest of the planet, but with no true idea of what's to come. Great start to the book. Number 2, the end of Holden's first chapter. Now, the end of this chapter was just hilarious, right? So, the ship that is still flinging rocks at Earth has been revealed, and the faction leaders want to send the Rocinante to take it out. We get a little banter between Amos and Christian about ass play and railguns compensating for tiny penises. before Holden interrupts when she says they won't be in charge of the operation, and she's like, let me finish, you prick. And Holden is just like, nah, Kevin Bacon was not in Footloose, nah, fuck that. And Christian, Fred, and Mars Prime Minister Smith are all looking at him differently, and then Bobby chimes in with a throat clear and reveals that she is the mission commander. And Holden is just like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, bless, no worries at all. Which is just hilarious, classic Holden. Then it's all finished off with some more banter between Avasarala and Amos, who for me personally, and I'm sure some of you will definitely agree, have the funniest chemistry in the whole series. Like, no one else would dare call Christian Chrissy, and she totally lets Amos get away with it because she secretly likes him best. Now, number 3, Holden seeing all his parents again / casual racism. So we get a really tender scene in which Christian rewards Holden for his service by evacuating all 8 of his parents, and it's just such a great moment. I actually teared up a little just now when I reread it. Well, when I reread it and wrote this a couple of days or weeks ago. So Holden walks in and sees Badass Arala talking to a bunch of people he doesn't really recognise until Mama Sophie turns around and he realises that all his parents are there. And they all crowd around him and hug him, and he is just swept away by the memory of being a little boy loved and protected by 8 parents. And Holden breaks down almost immediately, and then so does his family, both of them actually. Naomi is holding her hand to her mouth, trying to keep her emotions in. Alex is grinning like a child with tear-stained eyes, and Bobby and Christian are just standing there, like, looking proud of what they've done. And poor Clarissa Mao is just sobbing uncontrollably, bless her. And then to top off the emotion with a laugh, Amos is standing there like he walked in on the last line of a joke, just like shrugs and leaves them to it. Excellent. Holden is able to introduce his 2 families to each other, and the chapter ends with Jim thanking Christian. And I think this is their closest moment of the whole series, and he tells her that he owes her one, and she just laughs and says, yeah, I know. Excellent stuff. But then that's followed by Holden's next chapter, in which one of his fathers refers to belters as fucking skinnies right in front of Naomi, like, oof, sore spot that is. Holden is now stuck between making his father apologise and enjoying their last moments together for however long. He opts for the apology because, you know, it's fucking Holden. But before he can, Naomi interrupts him and agrees with Holden's father, essentially relieving the tension and awkwardness before it began. Naomi and Holden are both saddened by the realisation that people probably won't ever see each other as more than generalisations from the stories they hear, you know. More on that later. Number 4, the ROCI gets an upgrade. Really quick one. It's fucking awesome that fan favourite ship, the Rocinante, gets upgraded with hull plating tech inspired by the protomolecule, and shows a scary ass comparison to how advanced the Laconians are later on, and especially in the next book, which I'll get to. Holden, who kind of famously hangs on to the past, tells his crew to embrace the future, so a nice bit of character development there. Number 5, getting into Dawes' head. Now this is an example of a highlight that contradicts the cons I mentioned earlier, but that's what I was saying. The extra characters mostly works, just not all the time. So yeah, you probably could have done Dawes. They probably could have done Dawes' chapters just through Pars and the Holden's perspectives, but it was really nice to get into his head because Anderson Dawes is a really interesting character who has been a major political player for the belt since book 1, and it was really nice to get inside his head and get some real depth on someone you might think easy to read. He stands up to Marco on the series, which I'll get to in a sec. And later he attends the meeting with the OPA leaders and Holden, who then kicks him out because he's not meant to be there, and Dawes takes it like a champ. In the second chapter we read how he mourns for Fred and how it's really affected him, and Dawes believes he still owes Fred, so he decides to play Kingmaker for him. And it's a really great chapter which flicks to him meeting with and convincing the OPA leaders to trust in Holden. And it reminded me of the Tyrion chapter in Clash of Kings. Excuse me, sorry. It reminded me of the Tyrion chapter in Clash of Kings, in which Tyrion meets with all the small council members. Which brings us to number 6, Marco abandoning Ceres. So in Dawes' first chapter, as I said, he stands up to Marco over Philip's behaviour. And it was brave, but ultimately sparked Marco's true colour when he abandons Ceres, and he hides behind the idea of using Afghani guerrilla tactics in order to mask his cruelty and spitefulness. At least that's what I believe. And abandoning Ceres leaves millions of hungry mouths for the UN to feed. He also has a whole bunch of soldiers stay behind to try and fuck shit up on the not so down low. And we start to see more of how Marco is going to lose loyalty of his inner circle, particularly with Michio Parr, as this is the last straw for her and she begins to plan a mutiny after this. Which brings us to number 7. So after Parr works out every possible inch of her mutiny using a grease crayon on her walls so that she leaves out any possibility of being hacked or tracked electronically, she begins by contacting CARMODY, who is captain of the Hornblower, one of the ships under her command, the one she totally jacked at the start. Now at this point she's still unsure and has a chance to back away now, but she goes ahead and tells him she plans the mutiny and he has to join her. He doesn't want any part of it and would rather just go their separate ways, but she needs him to convince the others one way or another, and threatens to kill him and his ship if he does not comply. She believes that killing him now, if he refuses, will save a lot of lives later. So he threatens to get the word out before she could destroy him, and in response she sends out a video message informing Marco and everyone else of her mutiny, ridding herself of the chance to turn back. Then number 8, Alex getting laid. My man from Mars, Alex Camel, gets his dick wet. Chicka chicka, yeah. All jokes aside, this was a nice chapter in which the crew of the ROCI get to relax and enjoy each other's company, and Alex unknowingly helps Holden decide what he has to do next about the casual racism and stereotyping he and Naomi discussed before. Alex and Sandra Ip are like a couple for a good chunk of the book, and they make quite a cute couple. It was nice. It was a nice read, and I'm all about the love. Number 9, Holden using social media to spread love. Now this was just brilliant. This is just Holden doing what he does best, which, you know, what got him famous in the first place. Getting in front of a camera and showing the world the truth, telling the world the truth, as misguided as it might be. Now we get to hear from Monica Stewart, who is a surprisingly likeable character for a journo, I always thought, which always surprised me from book 3. And we get to see more of the belter culture as Holden records puff pieces that humanise the belters for the rest of the world and actually, you know, gives them a real idea of who they are and what their life is like. Now this kicks off a massive trend all around the galaxy as people from all over begin to do the same thing, and it's just super beautiful. 10 and 11, Bobby officially being made gunner of the Rocinante and then ripping Fred a new one. Now this was another nice moment in which Naomi tells Bobby if she wants to keep a position on the ROCI, it is all hers, that she and Holden have already discussed it, and as far as Holden is concerned, Bobby is already their gunner. Now this changes Bobby's outlook and how she presents herself in front of Holden later, which is quite funny. Now in the same chapter, Holden, Bobby and Naomi visit Fred Johnson, who is currently objectively making bad decisions, or at least is about to, when Bobby rips him a new asshole and puts him in his place. She tells him that he's fucking wrong and that she's not going to be a smiling Martian puppet, and that his plan for the OPA to get together and fix everything is just not going to work. Holden sides with Bobby, because of course he does, and tries to contact Michio Parr. Now later back on the ROCI, there is quite, like I said, there's quite a funny and touching moment when Bobby later approaches Holden all stiff and professional, referring to him as Sir, which of course he then, you know, he tells her to cut that shit out immediately. He assumes Fred sent her, but instead she says no, she's simply reporting for duty, which is a subtle way of letting Holden know she has accepted a permanent place on his ship, and of course Holden totally fucking misses it. Number 12, the close call at CERES. Now this is one of the scenes of extreme yet brief tension, and does a good job of showing us when Marco's plan actually works. Parr does shine in this scene as well, I must say. When still under Marco's rule, Parr sees the ship, a supply ship called the Minxie, and she believes giving the supplies over to the people left on CERES is the right thing to do. Holden and his crew have dropped Fred and his off at CERES and are making their way to the meeting point. They open a channel and there's a small moment of awkwardness, and they kind of just smile at each other, both hoping the other remains true to their word. They start talking, everything seems alright, and then suddenly, bang, 6 torpedoes are fired from CERES station. Michio is overwhelmed with fear and shows great leadership as she remains calm and keeps her crew in line. If she starts firing too, then everything will go to hell. Her whole family will probably die unless she kills everyone herself. Luckily, before she gives an order, she sees that Holden is shocked and angry too, giving her a small seed of doubt big enough to keep her from firing back. Her family and crew are ready to fire when the ROCI starts firing its PDCs at the torpedoes, but Parr knows better and orders her crew to wait. The ROCI destroys the torpedoes and no one fires at each other. Holden and Parr continue their conversation and complete the trade. Holden assures Pa it wasn't Fred, but Pa doesn't need convincing. She knows deep down that Marco is behind it somehow, which is then confirmed within the hour when Marco sends out a public response in which he uses the footage of the ROCI protecting Pa's ship, the Connaughts, to slander her name and accuse her of aiding the enemy, even though that the enemy including the millions of belters he abandoned on CERES. Number 13, Naomi's guilt and acceptance. Another brief one here. A lovely and sad moment. Holden finally confesses to Naomi why he didn't destroy the Pella, and she has many emotions inside fighting with each other, you know. Horror at the idea of Philip's death, rage at Marco for putting their child in harm's way, guilt not just for Philip but for Holden too in the situation she's put him in, and just generally her whole family putting him in the orbit of Marco. She feels terrible about it. She also feels an impatience with the need to mourn again what she had already mourned many a time. She thanks Holden for caring, but admits that she's already lost Philip. She failed to save him twice already, once when he was a baby and once when he was near a man, and now the only person who can save him is himself, which is of course foreshadowing for Philip's final chapter. I mean, Naomi is just such a great character. Like, it's only in the later books that I began to realise just how great a character is. Obviously that's how they wrote her, but you know, she's so perceptive and understanding of people and their feelings, big and small. Great character. Number 14, Holden and the OPA meeting. So Holden takes Fred's place and meets with the OPA faction leaders, Liang Good Fortune, Carlos Walker, Amy Ostman and Micah Al-Dujali. Now Anderson Dawes is also there, as I mentioned earlier, and although Holden greets him and is glad to see him, he immediately kicks him out. Now after Dawes leaves, Holden chastises Amy Ostman for bringing him uninvited. You know, he thinks to himself, if you're looking for mutual respect, you can start by asking to invite people to my secret meetings. But he thinks that's a rude thing to say out loud, so then he does anyway. He then shows them a recorded message from Michio Pa herself in which she stresses the importance of this meeting, as well as her vouching for Holden. It took them ages to come to a compromise regarding what Pa would say in the message, and Holden had to bounce between Avasarala and Pa's messages, Pa making requests and Chrissy explaining what it really meant. Now, throughout the meeting, he remembers the wisdom Avasarala gave him in preparation, and it pays off from the get-go, and he just fucking owns the meeting. Good Fortune mockingly remarks that Inaros has a habit of losing women to Holden, referring to, of course, Naomi and Michio Pa. And he recalls Chrissy telling him that they will try to embarrass him to see how he reacts, and obviously not to. Instead, Naomi walks in after escorting Dawes out and sits by a man's side, and that's just a nice little moment of, yep, I'm winning, bitch. And then a little later, when Holden refuses to reveal his exact plans until they have handled a few security issues and also to let them consult with each other, Good Fortune outright guesses the plan. Holden remains calm and ignores it with his best poker face, on Chrissy's advice, of course. Now, once the meeting is over and the OPA leaders leave, Holden sheds his political persona and is perplexed at Avasarala's ability to do this shit all day. He's only done it for 20 minutes and wants to dip his brain in bleach already. Bobby did warn him that these meetings suck balls, and she was right, so, you know, should have seen that coming. Number 15, the standoff at PALLAS. Right, in order to distract Marco and the Free Navy away from the Rocinante, as well as take out as much of the enemy as they can, the Coalition fleet launched their first major attack on the Free Navy's bases. Michio Pa leads the attack on Pallas Station. She systematically takes out all their defences before flipping a ship around and pointing her drive cone at the docks. She opens a channel to Rosenfeld, who one of Marco's in a circle, and threatens to slag the whole dock if they try to attack. She tells Rosenfeld he made a mistake putting his trust in Marco, same as her. Now is the time to redeem himself. He agrees and surrenders, and then Michio Pa is like, right guys, we're out of here, got another battle to attend. Which then leads us to number 16, Marco panicking like a little bitch. So during the attack, Marco himself is docked on Callisto, his ship being repaired. One of the OPA faction leaders, Micah Al-Dujali, wants to kill Marco in person for the death of his brother. Marco at this point is at peak arrogance, right? He expects an attack like this, but not from all sides. But he's still not worried. He thinks everything's going to fall into place, isn't he? He takes out Al-Dujali's forces with relative ease, and then after the battle, Marco tries to act like his plan is still coming together, blah blah, and says that he needs to show their strength for the counter-attack, same as he's already done before, and he's finally called out on his bullshit by his son, who Marco then embarrasses in return. Marco decides to attack and take Tycho Station, seizing control of the Jewel of the Belt while delivering justice to James Holden. And then something amazing happens. Marco is informed that Holden and the ROCI aren't on Tycho and that they are escorting the Giambattista towards the ring gate. The room goes silent and Marco is thinking to himself, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. For years he had kept a close eye on the ROCI and Naomi, always knowing where they were at all times, and now they had slipped by him. Marco is breathing hard, his heart beating fast. Mr. Confidence finally shook, and it is wonderful to read. Number 17, the Battle of Titan / Aftermath. Now this battle is told as a flashback after the fact. Pa is relaxing in a nice luxury resort on Titan when her family take turns to visit her. She receives a message from Avasarala asking her to help in the upcoming Medina battle, but Pa has nothing left to give. During the battle on Titan, Pa and her ships essentially flank the Free Navy fleet while the MCRN ships attack first head on. Despite winning the battle, Michio's ship the Connaught takes a nasty hit from a torpedo. Pa herself is burned on her back and left side, but what's worse is that she lost a husband and wife, Evans and Oksana, while Laura remains in a medical coma. Now Michio is guilt-ridden and blames herself for always following a leader, be it Johnson, Ashford, Inaros and now Holden, which of course is an important factor in her decision at the end of the book, which I'll get to later. And then lastly, number 18, the epilogue. The epilogue is from Anna's POV and is a nice contrast to the prologue, essentially putting a cork in the story. Anna and her family are heading out to the ring gates to a new colony on Eudoxia. They are together and safe and have far more understanding of what there is to lose and that they have to do better going forward. The book opens with despair and ends with hope. Okay, now I've gone through the minor highlights, we can move on to the stuff that I enjoyed the most, the major highlights. The word major automatically makes them better. So, number 1, forgiveness and acceptance within the void. So, at the beginning of the book, and more importantly, in the wake of the terrible events of the previous book, Prime Minister Smith, Secretary General Avasarala and Colonel Johnson are forming a joint task force, and their first field operation is to capture or destroy the Azure Dragon, a prospecting ship they believe is responsible for coordinating the attacks on Earth. Earth is currently pinned, their ships not daring to move due to the constant pressure of the stealth-painted rocks being flung at the planet. Taking out the Azure Dragon will allow the combined fleet some breathing room, so to speak. They choose to send the Rocinante, as it is not part of the combined fleet and won't be missed. The fact that it has some aftermarket add-ons, including a keel-mounted railgun, will of course prove useful. And as I mentioned earlier, Bobby is the chosen mission commander. Now at this point, Holden is still really uncomfortable by the presence of Clarissa Mao on his ship. I mean, she did try to frame and kill the poor motherfucker, but he still doesn't feel like she's part of his crew, regardless that, you know, she absolutely is at this point. Before the ROCI can engage, the Azure Dragon spots them and starts firing up its reactor, but Bobby, pro-gunner that she is, nails it with a railgun round and it starts dumping its core. Now, just for anyone who doesn't know, because I sure as hell didn't, dumping core doesn't mean that the whole reaction chamber / core is actually like ejected from the ship, but rather an intricate venting system basically blows out all the high temperature plasma, stopping the reactor from producing power and maintaining the ship's safety. Now for the 6-year-olds out there, basically the ship has a nasty stomachache and to avoid throwing up does a big fart instead. Okay? So the Azure Dragon dumps core and the crew of the ROCI, thinking the ship is inoperable, prepare to board. This is one of the moments where shooting first and asking questions later actually applies, and as their enemy has a few tricks up their sleeve yet. When the ROCI docks with the OPA ship, they lock their airlocks together with Bobby trapped inside. She wants to try and smash her way out, but can't because she can't risk damaging both airlocks. The Free Navy crew then EVA over to the ROCI in mech suits and start stripping the ROCI's hull, destroying PDCs and sensor arrays as they go along. Alex, overprotective of the ROCI as usual, wants to flip the ship around and scorch them with the drive cone, but can't because Bobby will be crushed. Just a classic Expanse situation if I've ever read one. Amos chimes in with the only real option, to hop out onto the hull themselves and just kill the attackers. Holden agrees and says he'll be right down, but Amos practically says, join us if you like, but we've got this. Holden is confused to who the we is, and then Clarissa, nicknamed Peaches by Amos, chimes in saying, "Wish us luck." Then we switch to Clarissa's POV and we get such a great chapter. Like I complained earlier about Amos only having one chapter, but in this case, one chapter was perfect. It gives us so much understanding of where Clarissa currently is mentally, and everything to do with her character after this is just so easy to interpret, which is just great writing in my opinion. The chapter begins with us by explaining to us Clarissa's mantra, which is, "I have killed, but I am not a killer, because a killer is a monster and monsters aren't afraid." Now these are her words of power, her silent prayer that she never gives form, she never speaks them aloud or writes them down. These words are an acceptance of her crimes, but a denial that she is nothing more than her actions. It helps her feed off of her fear and turns it into her strength and reminds her that she is a human. Excellent writing, I love it. Peaches and Amos start scaling the outside of the ROCI, and Peaches, despite being untrained for combat situations, especially one such as this, tries her best to remain calm and remember what she has learned, which includes Bobby Draper's trigger discipline lesson. They find the mechs and Peaches fires first. Amos leaps away and tries to flank around the Azure Dragon and finds another boarding party of 5, now 4, now 3, as Amos awesomely puts it. Clarissa is being flung about by her automatic suit thrusters, trying to avoid the bullets coming at her, but she takes one in the leg. One of the attackers moves in front of one of the ROCI's PDCs and just vanishes, taken out by Alex. Bad ass. The attackers now being a lot more cautious to stay out of the PDC's vision. Clarissa retreats away from the last mech chasing her before turning around when she's in a good position and waiting for him to walk straight into a fire. This works, but she quickly realises she has gone too far and has looped around the ship, and now 2 more boarders are moving toward her from the Azure Dragon. She tries to retreat but takes another hit in her arm. Now she accepts that she is about to die and is surprisingly content with it. Dying in the vastness of space fighting for her friends is a hero's death, a far better death than fading away in some concrete cell. She feels sad that Amos might grieve for her and wishes she could tell him how grateful she is to him every day for every day she's spent outside of that hole. She's in shock, I'm pretty sure, and she feels almost like she's watching the situation from a third-person perspective. The 2 mechs are closing in on her, and she tries to break herself despite her acceptance of death, when suddenly the 2 mechs are killed one after another by an incoming body she can only presume is Amos, until that person gets close and grabs her and she hears Holden's voice say, "It's alright, I've got you." Beautiful. She passes out and is woken up later in the medic bay by Amos. He informs her of their victory, 2 prisoners and a data core, and that Bobby is pissed she missed the action. Then Holden comes into the room. He and Amos nod to each other before the big man leaves them to talk. Holden states that they should have had this talk earlier, and Clarissa notices just how uncomfortable he is, and notes that this is not the sure of himself mental images she still has of him. Holden confesses that he is uncomfortable that she is on his ship, and she tries to apologise, but he waves it away, instead putting the blame on himself for not having this conversation earlier. He tells her he respects the bond she and Amos have, and that although she has handled herself well in the past, going out into a gunfight on the float is not something she should be doing. He tells her Amos took her out with him because he wants her to feel like she belongs here. Clarissa says, "But I don't." That's what you're saying? Holden meets her gaze and looks sad. He tells her that she doesn't belong every place Amos goes, but she is part of the crew, and that he failed to protect her and orders her not to go into a vac suit battle again, at least until she has been trained and deemed fit to fight in his eyes. She tells him she understands and calls him Sir. James Holden has been her sworn enemy, a symbol to Clarissa of her failure and the life that she could have had if she had made different choices. And now she realises he really is just a man she barely even knows, and surely Holden is also thinking something similar. They smile at each other for the first time, which is only a small thing, but is the beginning of a new relationship between a captain and his crewmate. They have, without actually putting it into words, moved on from the past with acceptance and forgiveness, and it truly is a beautiful moment. Major highlight number 2, Medina and the mysterious presence of Laconia. Now, I know this might seem contradictory, considering I said one of the main cons of the book was too many characters, as I've explained enough I think already, but I did actually enjoy these 4 chapters. They are from the POV of 4 very different belters of different ages and experience, and it gave us a wider sense of how the belters feel about the Free Navy and Laconia, etc. which ties into the theme of generalization found, well, throughout the entire series, but particularly Holden's arc in this book, as well as giving us a taste of the looming presence of the Laconian Empire. The characters are Salis, Jakulski, Vanderkorst, and Roberts, and I'll go through their chapters chronologically. So first we have Salis, a young tech who is one of the chosen to install the railguns on the ring station. In order to do this, the belters have had to build 3 wide belts of ceramic carbon silicate lace and steel around it, as drilling into the alien station is impossible. He describes the ring station as a ball with rubber bands around it, basically. Where the bands intersect, they have installed 6 massive railguns, too big for any ship to have keel mounted, which along with the belt that holds them are made with the same bleeding edge materials sent through the Laconia gate by Duarte. The carbon silicate lace has a creepy iridescent, I think that's how you say it, iridescent glow. I love it that I write words and then I can't even pronounce them. It's brilliant. The belters have installed the railguns in such a way that at any time there will be at least two of them will have visual on every gate. They do a test fire and everything seems to be working fine. Such powerful weapons in space should be as much as a thruster as they are a weapon, but the ring station doesn't move. It gives off a small ripple effect and that's all. One belter does have a theory that the station does move, but the ring space and gates move along with it, so you wouldn't notice. Now, I can't remember if this is confirmed or not, but it kind of makes sense to me, except that the ships and people in the ring space would have to move too, right? Because otherwise it would be in a different position relative to the station when it moves, right? Does that make sense? And you know, like if they're 20 meters away from the station moves, then surely they would no longer be 20 meters from the station unless they're moving too, right? Does that make sense? And if it did move you as well, wouldn't you feel it? Anyway, fucking these railguns are OP as fuck, and the idea of trying to get to Medina now is terrifying. And if you read the blurb and know that this novel will involve the Rocinante making a desperate mission to Medina Station, and the whole time reading it you'll be thinking, shit, how are they going to get past that? Surely they're fucked. But also this is the Expanse, so you know the writers will, you know, they're going to find an awesome, ingenious way to beat it. Later, Salis, Roberts and Vanderkorst are chilling in a bar in the drum of Medina Station when they notice people floating in the air. Some young belter months ago had figured out a way to launch himself or herself weightlessly into the air. And as long as they were careful, it was safe and fun, but either way a security team started rounding them up. And then Salis has some great inner thoughts about it, and I'm just going to read the whole paragraph because it's so tragically written. On ships, real ships, back on the right side of the gates, keeping the environment safe was always the first thing. Double check what had already been double checked, clean what was already cleaned. Playing fast and loose was a quick way to die, and your family and crew along with you. There was something about the big stations, CERES, Hygeia, Ganymede, and now Medina, that gave kids license to be dumb, reckless. Stability, Salis thought. Having a room as massive as a drum did something to people's head. He felt it too. It seemed too big to break. Didn't matter that nothing was really that big. Anything could get broken. Earth got broken. Acting like risks weren't risks put them all in danger. Even so, there was part of him that was sorry to see the security crew lock down the flyers. Kids being kids. There should be a place for that somewhere. Martians had it, Earthers had it. It was only the belters who'd spent too many generations dying for their first fuck up to let the kids play sometimes. So then Robert starts to get emotional about Medina. This is the first place the belters have ever built for themselves. Everything before they had found. CERES, PALLAS, etc. But Medina was built by belters, lived in by belters, given power and now arms so that no one else could take it from them. It is their home, the capital city of the void. The chapter ends with a cynical point from the veteran OPA belter Vanderkorst, who says, if it ever does get taken away, then they sure as shit won't get it back. The next POV from this group we get is their supervisor Jakulski. His chapter opens with him being asked a favour by a young belter named Shalui, Shalui, to cover him at the greeting ceremony for the Laconian grandees. Jakulski doesn't want to do it, as he hates the uniform and would rather go drinking with his buddies, but Shalui's eye is caked with pus for some nasty infection, and he doesn't want to put the girl off that he has his eye on, his only soon-to-be one eye, who will also be there at the meeting. Jakulski reluctantly agrees as he remembers what it is like to be young and in love. On his way back to his cabin to get change, he thinks about the current situation back in Sol System, with Michio Pa putting the station slightly on edge after having gone rogue. But everyone on Medina had been OPA at some point, and in some ways the Free Navy being split was comforting, as it reminded them of the way things have always been. But they aren't truly worried, especially with their new railguns up and running. And if Duarte was getting nervous about it, it was good for Medina. It means more resources, men and training for the locals were coming through. But most importantly, the Proteus had come through. The first ship to have come through the gate that hadn't gone out at first. It was a peek at what Duarte and his new empire had been up to. And boy, depending on what side you are, it is either immensely terrifying or fucking very comforting. To be honest, it's pretty fucking scary regardless. The breakaway Martian fleet only went through the Laconia gate maybe 3 or 4 months ago and are already rolling out the arguably biggest, most powerful spaceship ever created. We know why now thanks to the next 2 books. But fuck me, when I was reading about this I had no idea what to expect, you know. The Proteus was fast enough to make its way to Medina without using its Epstein drive, and slow and controlled enough to dock it. Jakulski makes it to the meeting just in time for the Martians, or Laconians, as they should be called, to arrive. They clearly have the military discipline of Mars and are as graceful as any belter in OG. Their leader, Captain Montemayor, immediately shows his belly to the belters and lets them know that they are only here to help, and that Duarte has the utmost faith in their ability to hold the station. Later, Jakulski meets up with his colleagues at the bar, and they discuss rumours and possibilities of what's really going on with the higher-ups. Supposedly, Duarte sent the Proteus on Marco's request after Pa's mutiny, but it's hard to believe. Some people think Duarte is placing people to take over when everything goes to shit. Van der Koers wants to keep his mouth shut as the veteran knows better, but the others force a reaction out of him. He questions when wars start and when they end, and when this one will end, and then the next chapter is from Van der Koers' POV. As I said before, Emile Jacquard van der Koers is an older belter, veteran OPA him. His chapter opens with him being thrown into a cell after being beaten and interrogated regarding a recent attack on Medina. After sitting in a dark cell for a while, some guards take him to another interrogation room, and Van der Koers totally checks out one of the young guards, but prefers a man his own age. The boy is left alone with Van der Koers and proceeds to suck on a focus drug while questioning him. It is here that we learn that 15 or 14 small colony ships had shot through multiple rings at the same time in an attempt to get past the railguns, but it didn't work out so well as they were all shot down pretty fast. The boy continues to question Van der Koers for hours, asking him what he had heard, who told him, what he knows about the current state of the systems, about his colleagues and Michio Pa, about CERES, Tycho Station and Ganymede. Exhausted, Van der Koers gives up sticking to safe answers and simply speaks his truth. He is thrown back into a cell and then eventually released like it was nothing. This interrogation has a lasting effect on Van der Koers' behaviour, however. He becomes more withdrawn and not wanting to speak out and avoiding political subjects altogether. He even switches from booze to water. While having a drink with his colleague, Salis reveals that he had heard from his friend in comms that a hidden dump in the data core had been found walled off, and that this was most likely how the colony ships had communicated since they all confirmed with each other and came through the gates at the same time. He also says that 2 ships didn't make it through. This pricks up Van der Koers' ears as the boy interrogator repeatedly asked for an exact number of ships that came through. There's obviously an attempt to slip Van der Koers up if he was the rat, you know. The colleagues are interrupted by Roberts watching the news feed on a hand terminal. It turns out the coordinator had been caught and will likely be executed. Now I can't remember if or when it is confirmed, but I think it's pretty obvious regardless that Duarte was behind the attack. Most likely he wanted to both test the railguns and the resilience of the belters on Medina. Throughout the chapter, Van der Koers has some interesting inner thoughts about the current state of things. It wasn't the first time that he had been thrown into a cell for doing something he didn't do, but it had always been Inner's responsible. The more it changes, the more it stays the same, he thinks to himself. During the interrogation, he thinks about how little he truly knows about the people he surrounds himself with, and thinks about what the things they say that could be hinting at more. Salis often boasts about having a contact in communications and that he knew what was going on regarding Inneros and Duarte. Roberts had compared the arrival of Duarte's advisors to the proxy war of Callisto, and Jakulski was at the greeting when they had arrived. He said he did it as a favour, but perhaps he wanted to be there to keep an eye on the enemy. There are thousands of belters living and working on Medina. Most of them were OPA before they were Free Navy. Most of them hadn't known what was coming. Some of them could still have family on Earth or Ceres. Later at the bar, he reflects on how he had lost almost 3 days in a dark cell with no lawyer or union representative, and by rule and custom should have asked for one, but reckoned that would only bring him more bruises. He knows enough about history and human nature to know when the rules were no longer rules. He touches his OPA tattoo and thinks how he had once been a statement of rebellion, and now it just seemed to make him old, taking sides in the last generation's fight. When Salis comforts him and offers to buy him a drink, Vanderkorst shrugs it off. He has no idea how to explain any of this to young Koyos like Salis and Roberts. They haven't seen the things he has, experienced the beatings and interrogations. They may have the naivety of youth, but Vanderkorst knows what is coming next. Medina was not a new beginning in history, and it will end the same as all places humanity sets its flag. Now, the last chapter of these belters is from the tech Roberts, but I'll speak about that in a couple highlights time. Right, so that was volume 1 of part 2. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed and are eager for the next one, which will be out as soon as I can get it out. No promises when. What can I say? I'm a busy guy and the churn never stops.